Hi, welcome to Building Your Best Brain podcast. My name is Sylvie. If you don't know me, I'm a neuroscientist as well as a part-time yoga and meditation teacher. And when I was planning this podcast today, I was thinking of diving into the neurobiology of stress. I don't know why I said that weird. Neurobiology of stress. And it's okay, I'm a scientist, not an English major, it's fine. It's something I share a lot about, of course, right? Like if you know me from my social media channels, I share about that quite a bit, as well as programs and workshops I do in person. Something I've been noticing as trends on social media in particular, and this is not new, this has really been happening since the pandemic, is a lot of tools, tips, and tricks to get rid of your stress, to manage your stress. And there's nothing wrong with that. There is some educational aspects too of what your stress response is, although I would say there's quite a bit less of that and a lot more tools on how to regulate it, usually linked to a product or a supplement or an app. Again, not horrible, but what I'm finding is really missing is there's a perception, it's not missing, there's a perception that stress is bad for you. There's a perception that it's something that you have to get rid of, and that if you don't manage it, or if you experience it, if you experience it, there's something wrong with you, there's something bad, it's something that you have to deal with immediately with urgency, and it's like the secret key to life is to not have it. And so what I want to chat to you about today is a bit of a perspective shift. And I'm naturally going to incorporate some science behind the neurobiology of stress in explaining this, but I really want to focus on my own personal experience. And this is coming from someone who has a neuroscience background, of course. So I'm in the 4th year of my PhD in neuroscience. This is also coming from somebody that has experienced trauma. So I'm not somebody who is not aware of what that means, right? So I've experienced different types of trauma in childhood as well as young adulthood. And so my perception of stress and my experience of stress comes from many different forms, many different time points in life. Before I dive into the perspective shift, I do want to share the different categories of stress. So one is the timeline, of course. So we have acute stress being something that happens once, that is a stressful stimuli that doesn't happen over and over again. So an example would be a car accident. And then there is chronic stress. So that is stress that happens over and over again, repeatable usually, and is usually a predictable pattern, right? So if you're finding your work environment is inducing stress, maybe it's the people, maybe it's the tasks, maybe it's the environment, that would be a chronic stressor. Another one that has been shown to be the most detrimental or the most difficult for your nervous system and body to adjust to in a healthy way is chronic unpredictable stress. And a really good example of that, I would say, would be a traumatic upbringing, whatever that means for you, right? But this idea that, you're young, right? So your brain is developing. There's just certain things about the world that naturally you don't understand because you're not at that age of development. And then the people that are supposed to protect you and keep you safe are acting in a stressful, unpredictable way. That is the hardest for your brain to be able to manage and adjust to. Timeline or pattern of stressors. So that's one way to characterize, it's a way to characterize how stress is being presented, which can help inform how your brain and body are adjusting. And then the other is the response, your neurobiological response. And this has two forms. One is the fast response and one is the slow response. The fast response uses the SAM axis. And so these are the sympathetic, adrenomedullary axis. And these are just different parts of the brain and body, and for this I will explain it because it helps piece together how we perceive different stressors and how to manage. So sympathetic means, in this case, sympathetic ganglia that we find in the spinal cord. So these are, the cell bodies will be in the spinal cord, and then it projects to areas in the body. And in this case, it projects to our adrenals, which are sitting on top of our kidneys. And the adrenals have a cortex, just like the brain. So it's, folds, extra tissues. They have their own special cells and release special stuff. And then on the inside is the medullary. And the medullary will, in response to this, release epinephrine and norepinephrine. And this circulates throughout the body, and there's receptors in the body and, of course, the brain. The brain will only receive norepinephrine. Epinephrine can't penetrate through and have physiological responses. It's fast, meaning it happens within seconds, and it can happen fast because it's not using any of the areas of the brain, really. So at the back of the brain, which is your brain stem, which is really the part of the brain that will be the closest to your spinal cord typically, has a small area called the locus coeruleus, and this is where norepinephrine gets released. It's where it's stored and produced. The reason it can happen so fast is because it's basically a reflex, right? Like our reflexes when we put something, like we touch our hand on a hot pot and we can remove it right away, it's because it doesn't require any of these front mid areas of the brain. It goes straight through the spinal cord and acts right away. Input, output. The second one is as you could predict, our slow response. And this is the hypothalamic pituitary axis, HPA axis. Our HPA axis uses the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus is an area involved in regulation. So things like circadian rhythms, appetite, things of that nature. And they'll release a specific hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone, and this just basically acts on the next structure of the brain, so it projects to the pituitary, and the pituitary is a hub that'll release hormones typically. So it's really close to the blood-brain barrier, meaning that it'll release stuff into the bloodstream. It'll release adrenocorticotropic releasing hormone. Long words, doesn't matter. Makes its way to the adrenals. So same thing on top of the kidneys, but it acts on the cortex, releasing cortisol, which of course there's many receptors all over the body doing different physiological responses, and it makes its way back to the brain, also having different physiological responses. This one, although, studies will say different things, happens within minutes. So now that you have the science, here's the perception shift. Your stress response, knowing the fast, the slow, however it's showing up in your body, is showing you internally where you're out of balance. And this is important. And if we didn't have this, we wouldn't know we're out of balance, and then we're in deep trouble. I'll explain how I use this in my life with actual examples, but what I will say before I get into it is, in the past, and at times it still happens, I always worry when I share, science behind stress and stress regulation, that you guys think that I don't experience stress. Your girl is stressed. With a traumatic past, stress. We deal with stress. I have stress. Moving right along. I would get really frustrated with myself when I would notice that I was experiencing stress, and that just perpetuates the problem. And truly, my body is showing me where I'm out of balance. And if my body could not show me where I'm out of balance, I would be incredibly sick. I would be terribly unhappy, probably. And I would not be able to have a joyful, fulfilling life. So if I never got stressed, if I couldn't tell that I was stressed, if it didn't show up physically in my body, I would be fucked. We would all be fucked. This shift helps me celebrate when I notice I'm out of balance. And here's why. I'm in the 4th year of my PhD, like I mentioned, and my partner and we went to Portugal at the end of the summer, and I really kicked back. Like no guilt, kicked back. We had 2 weeks like on the beach in Lagos, and then we went to Lisbon, ate lots of seafood. It was great. And then I came back and I felt like everything kind of hit me like a brick, honestly. We're in the process of, well, not anymore. At that time, we were in the process of submitting a paper. I'm working on the 2nd chapter of my thesis, teaching 3-4 classes of yoga, trying to maintain a presence here and sharing here because it's really important to me. And I definitely had the slow response going because my sleep was starting to deteriorate. My skin was starting to break out. I was starting to notice, for me anyway, that I get a bit of eczema when I'm stressed. And now you guys in my videos are probably gonna be like, is Sylvie stressed? Does she have eczema? How fun. I was feeling restless. Like I was often kind of like moving around when I was sitting down, and I was starting to have some tension in my neck. Now, it wasn't enough for me to stop. I was kind of like, all right, like we'll do our meditations. Like once we feel worked up, we'll do some breath work and we'll just keep going. We'll figure it out. And a big part of it was that there was a lot of unknown variables related to my PhD. And it all felt quite urgent. Wasn't really urgent. I made it urgent. And that's where, with the slow response in particular, although I will explain the difference, our thoughts really can activate it, right? Like when we shift perspectives, we can really, for the positive or the negative, we can really dictate which axis gets activated. You know what I mean? So I was perceiving everything as urgent, probably because I'm in my 4th year, and I just kind of like upped up the ante in my mind, and it was really showing up in my body. This persisted for a few weeks, and then I activated my fast response. This, of course, is activated right away, as I mentioned before, right? So things like car accidents, being attacked, right? Like immediate reaction, which is super critical for our survival. But this can get activated with things not critical for our survival. So I was getting to a point where I was getting in a panic, where I was breathing primarily from my chest. Like I could feel my heart rate was always elevated. My sleep was terrible. And my appetite was disappearing. And this wasn't for too many days, but once I started to notice this, I was like, shit's gotta change right now. Like the stuff inside is not going down in a way that is healthy and I'll be happy and functional and productive. So when you live in this camp for a long time, which can happen based on all the different types of stressors I shared before, especially if you had a lot of traumatic stressors when you're young, right? You have this kind of circuit that is like ready to go, right? And you may feel like your life is in danger, right? So me and my 4th year PhD trying to submit this paper, for whatever reason, my brain's like, you're gonna die. And I said, all right, we gotta change this because I'm not gonna die, but my body doesn't know that. So let's figure this out. What I did was I got all my yoga classes subbed for the month. So that was 4 yoga classes that I'm not teaching, right? So that kind of lifts off some of the pressure. I was doing things to replenish. So I was eating really well, eating smaller meals more frequently, was prioritizing my yoga practice, and all the yoga things that I was doing was like focusing more on the restorative, especially before bed, because I knew that my sleep would already be impacted because of the stress. So I was doing everything I possibly could to make that better. Basically, I was working on teaching and telling my brain that I was not gonna die. And so I was looking at kind of what would happen if. So I was playing the tape all the way to the end, right? So the idea was, what if I don't submit this paper at this certain time? Well, it means that there's potential for my PhD to be longer than 4 years. Yeah, that was really the biggest thing. There was potential that it would drag on longer than I would have liked. I was telling the ways that it wasn't a big deal and focusing on being flexible and looking at ways at how being flexible in the past has really benefited me. And this is because a lot of things happen that we don't predict that are quite positive, right? Like we think of opportunities of when we've met people, right, that were like no longer that were not in our life, and then all of a sudden showed up and changed the trajectory. Opportunities that popped up that weren't even like on your vision board or you thought about, that also changed the course of your life. So I started to tap into those things. And I started to also trim down a lot of other responsibilities. So new modalities that I was trying, extracurricular books I was reading, like basically anything extracurricular that was taking energy out and not putting energy in. I was pretty aggressive in cutting, and that helped immensely. I took a break from social media, as some of you guys might know, because I was creating from an empty cup anyway. So that's another shift that I have often, is that if you are not taking care or filling up yourself, you're benefiting no one. You are the number one AAA plus priority before you give yourself to other people. And so implementing all these things, I didn't feel better right away. I believe I started to feel some relief maybe 4 or 5 days. And of course, that's because, with the feed forward mechanism, right, it does take a minute to undo. It doesn't happen right away. And so that doesn't mean that once you start addressing all these things, if it doesn't work right away, that it's not working. The last thing that I started to do once I started feeling a bit better was looking into what I felt like the paper submission would make me feel. What it would make me feel is that I was associating it with other goals that I'm really excited about, right? So things like what I'm gonna do after my PhD that I find really exciting. Maybe having a family, right? Which is also really exciting. I associated all these things with completing my PhD. And so what I've done is that I've placed completing my PhD on these goals, and these goals, how I think they make me feel is fulfilled, content, creative, of use. And so again, once I started feeling a bit better and things were getting a bit more under control, I reflected on, well, how can I feel these things right now? And where in my life can I prioritize feeling these things right now? I did not have that stress response. I would have not come up with those conclusions. I would have not focused on these feelings. And I feel so much more at peace. And this cycle will continue, right? As we go through life and experience different things and get presented with different scenarios, our body and brain is going to show us when we're out of balance. And it's like, okay, how do I bring myself in balance? And it's never going to be like, take one supplement. It's never going to be beating yourself up because, oh shit, you're stressed about an email. Like, what is that stressor showing you? What is it showing you that you can, change in your day-to-day life, right? Implementing tools, taking away certain things, focusing on kind of regulating your physical symptoms. And once that's a little more under control, okay, well, what are the underpinning thoughts that this has come up? What is this stressor making me think it means about me as a person? What it means about my life? What am I associating it with? And what are the feelings that I want to feel? And how can I cultivate that in the here and now? Again, like, without your stress response, you wouldn't be able to get there. And what a fucking shame, So right now, like, a little update on, since I've implemented these things, what has happened? Well, next semester, I'm not teaching yoga as much. I'm conserving my energy for other things and teaching in one place only so that I can show up in a full way and so that I can be impactful in other areas of my life. During that time, we did submit the paper and we've got revisions and we'll be sending it back before the end of the year. So your girl is on track and that's a great feeling. And I've found a way right now, and of course this might change, to create for Synaptic Sylvie in a way that feels sustainable and fun and doesn't compromise my PhD project. Like, your girl can do both. I hope that this, personal recent example has helped maybe kind of gel all the scientific content together. But of course, if you have questions, drop them in the comments here. Send me a DM on Instagram. I would be happy to explain this in different ways. And often when we're listening and learning something, repetition is key, right? So I'm sure there's some things you've took away from this episode, but don't be shy to listen to it again. I guarantee that you'll pick out different things that are relevant. And it's also dependent on where you're at in life too, right? Like, maybe you're listening to this and you're like, well, I'm just chilling. This is fun information to learn. And another time you listen to this and you're like, my stress is red hot. Like, what the fuck is going on? So with that, I'm going to say thank you for being here. Thanking you for your attention. It means a lot that you're here because it means that you are willing to look at things differently and you're willing to choose a way that is beneficial and empowering, which is huge and wonderful, and I'm all here for it. Okay, I'll see you at the next episode.